Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Them, Season 1, Episode 2. It's called Day 3, so full spoilers for the episode, as always. This show, and this episode too, I suppose, but what I mean to say is this show, it's becoming very clear it's going to be very draining to watch, because this episode, I mean, apart, obviously there's the supernatural stuff, and there's the build of tension, and dare I say, Shining-esque build to characters possibly going insane, which we're going to be dealing with, and that's a big crux of it. But the actual, just the way these characters that are main family are being treated is kind of like this very tense horror show in and of itself, that, like, I kind of wanted to pause it like halfway through. It got to a point where I'm just like, my god, it's every single person they're going to run into, because, you know, we have three sort of like plots going on in the episode, because we have, you know, Henry at work, we have Ruby at school, and we have Lucky with Gracie sort of doing stuff at home and whatnot. And every single person they're interacting with, I was like, oh my, this just keeps getting worse. There's never a respite. That's probably intentional, because it's probably accurate to how it feels, but it was, I was championing so much the man who worked at the hardware store seemed like a nice old man who was very pleasant, particularly to Gracie. He was very sweet. He seemed like a nice man. He did not seem racist. That was very pleasant. It was just pleasant to meet a character who didn't seem like a racist piece of shit. Because so many other characters that we encounter in this are, or at least, like, because the best example before that, it may have been after that in this episode, but the best example other than him might be the girl who at least talks to Ruby at school. And she still says a couple of things that are very dodgy and that clearly isn't used to dealing with a black person, but she's nicer than, you know, all the other kids who just act extremely racist in class, and not even slyly. Like they essentially in unison start to mock her in front of the teacher, for which the teacher then decides to give Ruby detention for being distracting, because that about sums it up, I suppose, as far as how these people deal with injustice. So it's an infuriating episode, not because it's not good, because it is good. It was a solid episode. I have mostly positive things to say. The only real nitpick I have with the episode is that because we're doing a 10 episode show, I did kind of feel like we had to slow it down again a little bit, you know, because the episode starts so frantic because we've just had the gun incident and the police are there, and that's after the flashback, of course, as well, which I am going to talk about. But just in terms of the present day stuff, it starts off so frenetic, and there's the tension of the police sort of like having Henry up against the wall, and Lucky sounding kind of crazy, talking about this old lady that attacked her daughter, but there's no marks on Gracie anymore, so she looks a bit, you know, she looks like she's talking nonsense. And we have all this. We have the tension, we have the emotion as Henry's burying the dog, and of course the flashback gives a lot more context for the dog. But we have all this going on, but then they all kind of split up, because then it's like time to go to work, time to go to school, whatever. And they were all kind of getting their own thing going. And I did feel the pacing kind of linger a little bit as we did that, because it kind of felt like we were slowing down into TV pacing. And I get that it is a TV show, but it is kind of frustrating, because it's one of those things where I'm like, well, if there was a few less episodes, would this be a problem? And it's not necessarily that anything in any of these plots is not good, or probably won't be very valuable as time goes on, and it's probably actually important for the end of the episode that we've spent time with each of them on their own, doing different things, and seeing how their day is. It's actually quite effective at the end when they're having dinner and they're finally all back together again. Hearing Ruby being asked about her school day, and she just sort of goes, it's fine. And, you know, Henry sort of prods and says, no, you're giving me more than that. And she kind of like finds a way to tell him something without admitting the horrible experience she had. She just, you know, because when she was being mocked in class, when all the kids were doing all the, you know, the monkey noises and things like that, they started doing that because she tried to answer a question about Emily Dickinson, and she was the only one who knew the answer. and she turns this horrible experience, which is probably one of the most heartbreaking. And I think it's partly because she's younger than the other characters, the parents. I mean, obviously that's typically how parentage works, but it is really heartbreaking to see her sort of cry in class, like having this around her. Like she is completely and truly alone in that room, and you really feel for her. And she goes through this. You get to the end of the day, and she turns it into, "I was the only one in class who knew about Emily Dickinson." And then Henry is proud of his daughter. He's like, "Oh, see, of course you're the only one." And Lucky says something to that effect as well. And they're very proud of her. And it's almost like there's probably layers to this that I can't even begin to grasp. But I would say that I feel like she doesn't want to admit to her parents how she was treated that day. Perhaps out of shame, slightly. Perhaps out of not wanting to give them more to worry about themselves, because she knows they're going through a lot, as we know, because we're seeing them go through a lot. And maybe a mix of other things that I can't even comprehend. And it felt like it had a lot of weight behind it, because we saw her go through what she went through. So while I stand by the pacing being a little bit lesser in this episode, ultimately the time we spent with each of the characters on their own really informed all this. And even just on Henry's side as well, because his day at work was, not without incident and not without a trying experience, where he's also went through something, but he's keeping up this happy demeanor. He's keeping up this hopeful demeanor where we're in a new place. This is good for all of us. We're going to have a happy life here. And he's had a horrible day too, where the character who plays his boss, PJ Burns, the actor, he plays his boss's name's Stuart Berks, but PJ Byrne, I have seen this guy. This guy is so typecast as the douchebag, like white, like authority figure, right? That's who this guy is, because he was like the shitty principal in Black Lightning. Less to do with race, but he was also the kind of annoying principal in Big Little Lies. And I'm sure I've seen him be like the shitty white guy in something else. But here he is again. Here he is again in them. And this is like almost him turned up to 12, where he's just, he calls Henry into his office. And I got confused for a little bit, because I hadn't realized the last name was Emery. And I thought he was saying Emery as a mistake for Henry. But that's just me not paying attention to the last name. But he starts to do this thing where he keeps flip-flopping between like stern boss and disappointed father to playful colleague and wants to be his friend, and he's flipping back and forth. It's like exhausting, like waiting for the turn. And like there's moments where he tries to make small talk. He tries to ask Henry how is it? How's the new house? How's he fitting in? Blah 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 blah. And it seems like he wants to bond with his employee, but then he'll snap like that on a dime, and all of it is very stressing to watch. And clearly it's stressful to Henry, who the conversation is not that of just an employee and an employer, never mind an equal one. It's a conversation where he has to accept whatever tone, whatever frame of mind, whatever direction the boss wants to take here. Not just because he's his boss, but because of the social status that they both have because of their race. He knows that he is somewhat lucky to have the job he has, and there's even almost like a comedy beat in this scene where the boss says, we don't have many black people around here, and just as he says that, the black like janitor, I don't think we don't see him well enough to know if it was the one that we met before, but it probably is from last episode. But he's behind the blinds, and you see him sort of walk past, and it's just enough to sort of like, and the squeak just adds to this ironic timing of the moment. But so much of this scene is like Henry can't go into this conversation with any idea that he is respected, or that if he has like a concern, or if he has anything to like fight back against, that he can't. He has to kind of hold his tongue. He has to so the episode ends with him eating the pie, right? And I was saw, the phrase that came to mind while I was watching this scene with his boss was swallowing his pride. He was constantly swallowing his pride. And he gets so upset afterwards that he just, he's given this file to go and deliver, and he goes to the bathroom, he stuffs his mouth full of paper towels and yells because he has to scream. He has to scream and let it out. He's just trying to muffle it as best as he can. And at the end of this episode, when he literally forces down this pie, he's literally swallowing his pride. He ends up literally having to swallow something he really doesn't want to. Which, now I've never had a pie quite like this. Pies, for anyone who's not familiar with this, it's not impossible to find a pie like this in the UK, but when you talk about a pie in the UK, you're usually talking about steak pie or mince pie or chicken pie or something. You're talking about pie with meat in it, right? You're talking about like the dinner as opposed to the dessert. There's very few. I mean, not that we have no dessert pastries, because they do exist, but it's a very American thing, I think, in our heads to see lots of pies that are filled with fruit as a sweet dessert. And what I'm going to give credit to for this episode is that the flashback at the start of this episode isn't just your typical TV flashback. Because flashbacks are like this one, where you get one flashback of a bit of a character's backstory. They'll serve kind of one purpose, or they'll serve a little bit of a thematic thing just to set up the episode, and that's fine. And for the most part, that's fine. Sometimes you'll sort of roll your eyes because sometimes it feels like they're just doing it for the sake of having something different or a different time period, or they want to do whatever. But this opening flashback introduced us to so much that came back later in the episode. It introduced the idea that Henry was in the military, that he was obviously mistreated, that he and other black soldiers were tested. They tested things like mustard gas on them. That is the horrible story that he tells. He talks about how it tasted sweet, or it smelled sweet when you're choking on it, which is why he has this incident with the slice of pie at the start in this flashback where he ends up throwing it against the wall, and it basically causes PTSD. He's got PTSD, and the sweet smell of the pie is kind of like triggering it. And so that's there. So not only do we have that, and we have obviously the vision that he has later of seeing someone in the mustard gas in his work through the window. Not only do we have him, the bookend in the episode with eating the pie, all of which has more meaning because of the flashback. It also does this thing where the episodes, the last episode ended, then this episode, once we're back to present day, starts with this idea that Lucky is the one who's losing it, and that she is the one who was seen waving the gun around, and everyone's looking at her like she's maybe losing it. And even her daughter, even Ruby's, has that conversation with Henry when he's dropping her off for school and says, "Hey, is mum crazy?" because she was talking about this crazy old ghost, Vera, I think the name was, and all these other things. And he tries to calm her down, but there's this kind of, and he even says it in the scene. And if anything, I would say that the one complaint I have about this is that he did overly explain it to us, because what I liked about that opening flashback is that it showed us a time when Lucky was the Rock, where she was the one who, and not the smell what the Rock is cooking. No, I don't mean that. not the people's champion. She was the Rock in the relationship, where she was the one who was stable and sturdy and was there to help him get through this rough time, where he was losing it, where he was breaking down and couldn't control himself and was a bit of a wreck. And now that she seemingly might be breaking down, because the sense we get from the end of the last episode, then the start of this one, is that she's the one breaking down and he's there for her. So it gives us this great thing where it's flipping their roles a little bit. So I think the flashback had a lot to add to the characters just on that. Never mind all of the new things introduced about his past and the mustard gas and all that. All of which was obviously interesting and played into the episode. What's funny is that by the end of the episode, I actually feel like both Lucky and Henry are possibly being affected psychologically to the point where they're maybe both going crazy. For a while in the episode, I thought it was just her. I thought it was just Lucky, and we had a few scenes to sort of like maybe suggest this. We had her at home with Gracie, and another well done sequence. I wasn't that fan of the jump scare right at the very end of it, but I thought the build up of Gracie talking about the ghost being in the shadow, the shot looking into this dark corner of the room, Lucky walking towards it, very apprehensive, and then we see the tall, skinny figure that we saw last episode kind of come out of the shadow, and her coming up and seemingly touching Lucky's cheek, but Lucky not being able to see anything or hear anything. She says she can sense something, like she can maybe smell something. That's kind of hinted at, but and the idea that maybe this is her starting to really affect her, that the idea that this spirit, this demon, whatever it may be, is starting to affect Lucky. And the scene that obviously made me think of The Shining more than anything was the axe, right? It was when she's at the hardware store and she sees the wall of axes, and we get like a ghost version of the guy who works there who says, "Oh, do you ever wonder what the inside of a brain looks like? I mean, if some bitch killed my dog, I'd start to get curious." It felt very The Shining. It felt like Jack talking to the ghost in the hotel to me. Never mind the fact that we're dealing with an axe, which is also very, Shining. So you've got that going. So you're thinking, oh, okay, so we're building this. And if I had any doubts at this point, it was at the end of the episode where she intentionally, after she has this moment where Gracie says that she did see, or at least could sense something was going on with a ghost. It's a little bit awkward because Gracie promised not to say that, but she did anyway. And the way that Henry kind of looks over her, the way he kind of like sort of tries to, again, keep it calm, but there's a lot of forced smiling, there's a lot of forced optimism kind of in the conversation. The way she like cuts him a slice of pie, walks over and puts it in front of him, and very aggressively is pleasant to him. And then he starts to get the shakes, but he forces himself to eat this pie. So yeah, what I was going to say earlier when I sort of tangented off into we don't really have pies like that, or they're not that common in the UK, is that they always seemed like a nice enough treat. Particularly this one, which looks like it's it's all berries and raspberries and things of that nature in this pie. It looks nice enough. He made me never want to touch one of these damn things. This was disgusting. The way he was eating these bites that were far too big for his mouth, and he had like stuff like running down the side of his mouth. It was like, oh no god, I never want to eat one of these pies ever. Like, I'm done. You've sold me on never wanting a pie. Okay, I don't want to. This was disgusting. But this was the thing, is that okay, she's losing it, and she's kind of getting very passive aggressive in a way that she knows it's going to affect him. And you do wonder how much Ruby remembers this incident when she was little, because that was the thing, she was like Gracie's age in the flashback, but he forces himself to eat it. He swallows it, and that's what I was thinking, the swallows his pride, like he's literally doing it at the end with the pie, because so much of this existence that they have around these people, around all these racist people particularly of the era, is they constantly have to swallow everything that's given to them. Because if not, then their lives are made so much worse than they already are, and it's a horrible existence. And that's the beauty of the horror storytelling, is you take what it feels like in the real thing, and you make it more literal. You make it more this, you make it more that, and all of a sudden we have something where there's subtext to all these things that are happening. Now, I have no idea where it's going. It feels very Shining right now, where both of them might be going crazy. I don't necessarily suspect it's going to build up to them killing each other and the kids. That feels like it's a bit too in the dark side. But I am very intrigued. I'm very intrigued, and I think the episode did a good job of building the core family characters. Also, I think the actress who's playing Gracie is quite good. I think there's a couple of moments where she's sort of looking into the corner and she talks about seeing the ghost, or how she smells, and I think the kid's delivery is pretty solid. Melody Hurd is the actor's name, so that kid's got a future. Got a future in this business. As far as the neighbor stuff, because obviously the Alison Pill, the Betty character, she's obviously concerned. The irony, of course, is that she thinks the cops aren't doing enough when they're being very forceful. At least the first two are. The third cop who shows up, who's a bit more reasonable sounding, although I question if he's just better at appearing diplomatic than actually being remotely fair in that sense. So he is still very quick to say, oh, the dog's an accident, maybe it was poison or something, or that window's too small for anyone but a child. And that's possible. I mean, that's very true. It does look too small for anyone but a child, but it doesn't necessarily discount other possibilities. And we know there's a ghost, so but it could be a neighbor, possibly. But of course, Betty's horrified. She's horrified when she goes to her friend Midge, who, it's funny because we speculated last episode that Midge was maybe just slightly less racist, but it turns out she just didn't care about them moving into the neighborhood because her and her husband had already decided to move. So it wasn't that positive of like an impression we got last episode. It was just slightly better than everyone else, but that's out the window now because now it's just we're leaving, we don't care. And Betty, she thinks that this is going to lead to more black families, so they have to get rid of them. And the fact that one of the other neighbors is leaving a house empty is, for her, you can just see the warning signs and the bells all going off in her eyes. And what's funny is that our main characters are seemingly going crazy because of the supernatural entity in their house and the stress they're going through, whereas Betty just seems to be psychotic all on her own. When she's like cracking the egg and saying, well, I wish you very well in your new house, and she's very, the eyes are beaming into her. That was pretty creepy. Alison Pill's got the devil eyes, I guess. But she pours sugar on the Midge's husband's new car, showing that she is a spiteful human being, which was already kind of obvious, but like we're really sort of setting that home now. Everyone around her's pretty bad, but she seems to be the worst, and there's a clear implication in this episode that she is perhaps very spiteful even compared to everyone else, because seemingly her and her husband have not been able to have kids. It seems to be this sore spot when she finds out Midge is pregnant again, when her husband brings up that they've got a kid, so they need more room. Betty gets very defensive. She says, what's that supposed to mean? It never even occurred to me they didn't have kids in the last episode. I don't know if it was overly pointed out, but this episode made it very clear that they don't. And that this is maybe, like, not that specifically her racism is fueled by, like, the tragedy that is and the pressure that's put on her, but her racism is certainly amplified because she has, like, all of this rage to pour into something. So it's in turn concocting this worst possible version of herself. So she's entertaining as a sort of potentially psychotic villain, at least so far. And there's a little bit of subtext there's a little bit to analyze with her and sort of like exploring why she's as bad as she is. Everyone else obviously still very racist on this street. There's no doubting that. But her husband is a bit more less effort. Like it almost feels like the husband, he doesn't like it, but he's bordering on just kind of being like, whatever, and not really, just not willing to just kind of move on and not care. Where she's like, no, we have to make a stand. We have to gather the troops and get fighting and all the rest of it. And everyone else acted really shocked at the new family's presence on day one, but it kind of feels like already on day 3 that everyone else is kind of calming down and they're just getting used to the idea that there's a black family on the street. Not that excuses their reaction on day 1 by any means, but again, the idea that Betty is like, no, this fire is not going away for her. She is going to take this fight as far as she can, and so I'm curious to see where that goes and like how much we escalate things as the episodes go on. But yeah, so solid episode. Like I say, maybe a little bit of pacing. And what's interesting is I think this is one of the longer episodes as well. So my mild pacing complaint, where they're all split up in the middle of the episode, might actually be just a one-off thing, because it feels like the episodes might be tighter after this, just based on the runtimes. So I look forward to episode 3. So let me know what you thought of episode 2 of them in the comments below, and by all means, please add your own analysis of the episode. Particularly if there's any black viewers watching these reviews, I would love to hear your side, your viewpoint of this, and how you're reading these episodes. Because I like to think I can sort of read a message and can analyze as best I can, but ultimately, there's only so much. There's certain little barriers I'm never going to break through, and it's great hearing the viewpoints for something like this, because especially when you go back and you reconsider things. And what a lot of this type of horror, which I guess effectively in a lot of ways this wave started with Get Out, is kind of taking moments that most, if not all, black people have to go through in some way, and kind of like showing how that feels to people who haven't experienced it. And it works for both audiences, because for, like I say, for someone like me, and by that I just mean white, it's like, oh, this is something you've probably never felt. Here's a kind of a taste of that to sort of maybe make you more empathetic than you were before. And for a black audience, I have to imagine it's a little cathartic, in the way that horror has always been cathartic. When you explore subjects that are on your mind, there's a reason why a lot of post-Vietnam horror movies, the subtext is often about the horrors of war and the horrors of violence and that kind of thing, or so on and so on. Like there's examples time and time again. So yeah, please comment in the comments. Like and subscribe. Liking is super important. It is the simple, easy thing to do to help keep all the content coming. But you can support me financially as well over at patreon.com/MaileFuzzTV. As little as $1 per month can help keep all the content coming. And of course, we're forever in your not debt. I'm not giving it back, but forever in your good graces. You're forever in our good graces, I should say. I can't speak anymore. Clearly, I've exhausted my my grasp of the English language for today. So I will say adieu, and thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, and I will see you next time.